Welcome to the 12th episode of our podcast. This time, we're taking a closer look at M&A in India, getting into the nitty-gritty of due diligence. Especially with all the regulatory changes and this big push for ESG.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how due diligence has evolved, It's gone from just ticking boxes to like this deep investigation, almost like detective work, right? You
Yeah,
really got to understand the company inside and out before making that leap.
absolutely. And, one of the things that's been making headlines is those Competition Act amendments. Seems like they're trying to speed things up, make approvals faster, more efficient.
Exactly, yeah. The whole idea is to cut down the red tape, make it easier for businesses to get things done, but, there's always another side to the coin.
Right, right. I mean, going too fast could mean overlooking crucial details, right? Cutting corners.
Exactly. Streamlining is great, but we can't just toss risk out the window. Like, what about minority shareholder rights? Are those getting enough protection? And what about potential lawsuits? These are things buyers and their legal teams have got to consider.
It's like a constant balancing act, speed versus thoroughness. And it's even more interesting because all this is happening while ESG is becoming a bigger and bigger deal in M&A. Environmental, social, governance, you know the drill.
Oh, absolutely. ESG's gone from like a side note to center stage. It's not just a nice to have anymore. It's a core part of figuring out a company's long-term value, how sustainable they are.
Have you seen ESG actually impact valuations in India, though? I mean, real money, not just theoretical adjustments.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely affecting valuations, sometimes significantly. We've seen companies with strong ESG performance get higher valuations compared to those with weaker practices. Like recently, there was this renewable energy company. Their commitment to sustainability actually boosted their valuation when they were acquired.
Wow, that's really something. It shows how ESG translates into actual financial value. Makes you think companies should be working on their ESG scores to be more attractive targets.
Right. It's something they're focusing on more and more, developing strong ESG strategies, being more transparent in their reporting, getting those external audits. It's not just about appealing to buyers either. It's about meeting investor expectations and, building a business that lasts.
And of course, SEBI, India's securities regulator, they're pushing for ESG too, right?
Definitely. They're big on ESG disclosures, making sure companies are upfront about their practices. They've updated the listing obligations and disclosure requirements, or LODR for short. Companies got to be more open about major events, even address those market rumors quickly.
So it's about being transparent, giving investors a clear picture of what's happening. How do these LODR changes actually affect due diligence, though?
Well, buyers now have access to a ton of information that might not have been easy to get before. These disclosures give them insights into a company's operation, potential risks, even how the public sees them. Like if a company has been accused of, say, environmental violations, that would be disclosed under the amended LODR, so the buyer can factor that into their due diligence.
Makes sense. Get the full picture before jumping in.
Precisely. And this transparency thing, it's extending to other areas too, like data privacy, especially sensitive in cross-border deals.
Data privacy is a hot topic for sure. What are some things buyers need to keep in mind?
One of the biggest hurdles is navigating all the different data protection laws globally. What flies in India might not work in Europe, for instance, where they have the GDPR. That sets a high bar for data privacy.
So how do companies even begin to deal with all these different regulations in different countries?
It's a big job, often involves working with legal experts who specialize in data privacy. Buyers really got to scrutinize how the target company handles data, collection, storage, processing, sharing, the whole nine yards. They also need to look at any cross-border data transfers and make sure everything's compliant with the rules in each region.
Sounds like it could be a minefield if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Any examples of data privacy concerns affecting M&A deals?
Oh, absolutely. There was a big fintech merger that fell apart because the acquiring company was worried about the target's data privacy practices. Turns out they had some questionable data handling practices. The acquirer wasn't willing to take on that risk.
Yeah, that shows how important data privacy is in due diligence. It's not just about following the law, it's about protecting your reputation and avoiding potential liabilities.
Exactly. And while data privacy is critical, we can't forget another big one: intellectual property, or IP.
Right? IP can be a company's most valuable asset, but it can also be a huge risk if it's not protected properly. What are some of the key IP things buyers need to look at?
First off, you got to assess the target company's IP portfolio. Patents, trademarks, copyrights, the whole shebang. Make sure everything's registered correctly, being used effectively, and there are no potential infringement issues.
So it's about understanding the value of the IP and making sure it's protected and commercially viable, right?
Exactly, but it's not just about the IP itself, it's about understanding the legal side of things too. Gotta look for red flags, like ongoing or potential lawsuits related to the company's IP.
Which brings us to litigation risk assessment. How do buyers assess that, especially in India, where the legal system can be complex and cases can drag on?
That's a great question, and it often needs the expertise of experienced lawyers who really understand the Indian legal system. Buyers need to dig into any pending or potential legal disputes the target company might have.
So it's not just about the current lawsuits, it's about anticipating future legal challenges too.
Exactly. It's about spotting potential vulnerabilities, figuring out the likelihood of litigation, and understanding the potential financial hit from any legal battles. And since resolving cases in India can take time, buyers need to be extra careful about inheriting potentially costly and time-consuming disputes.
Seems like due diligence is getting more and more complex with all these factors to consider.
It definitely is. And that's where technology is stepping in. AI and machine learning tools are being used to automate some parts of the process, especially things like document review and compliance checks.
That's pretty cool. Sounds like technology could make due diligence more efficient and accurate.
It definitely can. But we got to remember, technology is a tool. It can't replace the experience and judgment of professionals, especially lawyers who understand the nuances of law and deal making.
So finding that balance between technology and human expertise.
Exactly. And that balance is crucial for making sure due diligence is thorough, effective, and ethical. And speaking of balance, let's go back to ESG. You mentioned earlier how it's become a major factor in due diligence. Have you seen any specific challenges companies face when trying to integrate ESG into the process?
One of the biggest challenges I see is the lack of standardized ways to measure ESG performance. There are so many different frameworks and rating systems out there. It's hard for companies to know what to focus on or how they compare to others.
That's a good point. The ESG reporting landscape is kind of a wild west right now. This lack of standardization makes it tough for investors to compare companies and make informed decisions.
It also makes it easier for companies to greenwash, make exaggerated or misleading claims about their ESG performance.
Right, and that's where due diligence becomes even more important. Buyers can't just take those sustainability reports at face value. They need to really dig into the company's operations, their supply chains, to verify those claims.
So do your homework, don't take things at face value.
Exactly. And that's another area where lawyers are crucial. We need to help our clients ask the right questions, gather the right evidence, and assess how credible those ESG claims are.
Now let's talk about something closely linked to ESG data privacy. We discussed the legal complexities and compliance, but practically speaking, what can companies do to make sure they're meeting their data privacy obligations during M&A deals?
One key step is doing a thorough data privacy audit of the target company. Figure out what data they collect, how they store it, who has access, how it's used, the whole picture.
So understand the data landscape before even considering the deal.
Absolutely. And this audit should also look at the company's data security measures. Are they strong enough to prevent breaches? Do they meet industry standards? Any weak spots that need fixing?
All important questions.
Yeah.
And I imagine this is where legal and tech experts need to work together.
Definitely. You need lawyers who get data privacy regulations and cybersecurity pros who can assess the technical infrastructure and security protocols.
It's a team effort, just like most aspects of due diligence.
Exactly. Once you have a clear understanding of the target company's data privacy practices, you can start thinking about how to integrate those practices into the merged entity.
So it's not just about checking boxes. It's about building a culture of data privacy in the new organization.
Exactly, and that's where leadership from the top is crucial. The CEO, the board, they need to make it clear that data privacy is a priority, and everyone's responsible for upholding those principles.
It's about setting the tone from the get-go and making data privacy part of the merged company's DNA.
Well said. And this focus on data privacy also connects back to another important aspect of due diligence: intellectual property.
Right. IP can be a really valuable asset in tech-driven mergers. How do buyers assess the strength and value of IP during due diligence?
It starts with figuring out what kind of IP it is: patented technology, valuable software, a recognizable brand or trademark. Once you know the type of IP, you can dig deeper into its legal status and how commercially viable it is.
So is it actually worth something? Can you make money from it?
Exactly. That means looking at things like how strong the patents are, market demand for the technology, the competition, all of that.
And of course, buyers need to watch out for any potential infringement issues too.
Absolutely. They need to be sure the target company's IP isn't stepping on anyone else's toes. That can get complicated, especially in industries where things are changing fast and new patents are popping up all the time.
It just shows how due diligence needs a multidisciplinary approach with expertise in law, technology, finance, business strategy, all of it.
Couldn't agree more.
And speaking of valuable insights, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. But before we move on to the final part, I'd love to hear what you think is the most important takeaway for our listeners.
Well, I think the key takeaway is that due diligence is more than just a legal or financial checklist. It's a strategic process that requires a deep understanding of the target company, the industry, the regulations, and the overall market trends.
So connect the dots and see the big picture.
Exactly. And recognize that due diligence isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. The landscape is always changing, and buyers need to be ready to adapt.
Stay agile, stay informed, just like we encourage our listeners to do on Couple of Lawyers' Arguments and Thoughts.
Absolutely. Staying informed and adaptable is so important in this M&A world, and that's what we try to do with our podcast, right? Break down these complex topics, get insights from people in the field, and hopefully help our listeners make better decisions.
Speaking of insights, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on something we haven't really discussed. The human side of due diligence. Beyond all the legalities and financials, there's also assessing the target company's culture, their leadership.
Oh, that's a great point. Culture and leadership can make or break a deal, but they often get overlooked. If the cultures clash or the leadership styles don't mesh, it can create huge problems during integration and could even tank the whole thing.
Yeah, how do you even assess something like culture during due diligence? It's not exactly quantifiable. Is it just gut feeling? Or are there more structured ways to go about it?
It definitely needs a more nuanced approach than just crunching numbers. One effective way is to interview key people at the target company. That gives the buyer a sense of the company's values, how they communicate, the overall work environment.
Get a feel for the company's personality, see if it's a good fit.
Exactly. And it's about evaluating the leadership team, too. What's their track record? Where do they see the company going? Do they have the right skills and experience to lead the integration after the merger?
Those are important questions. A strong leadership team can make a huge difference in a smooth transition.
Absolutely. And that's another area where having experienced legal counsel can be invaluable. Lawyers can help buyers structure the deal to minimize those cultural and leadership risks. For instance, they can negotiate earn-out provisions that incentivize key leaders to stick around after the merger and help with the integration.
So think outside the box and find ways to bridge those cultural and leadership gaps.
Precisely. And this brings us back to being adaptable in due diligence. Every deal is unique. There's no one-size-fits-all playbook. Buyers need to be flexible, ready to adjust their strategies based on the specifics of each deal.
And that's where having a solid understanding of the legal and business landscape really helps.
Right.
Like what we talk about on Couple of Lawyers' Arguments and Thoughts, right? It helps you anticipate challenges, spot opportunities, and navigate all the complexities of M&A deals.
Absolutely. Knowledge is key, especially in this fast-paced world of M&A. And that's what we aim to provide our listeners on the podcast, the knowledge and insights to stay ahead of the game.
This deep dive has been packed with insights for sure. We covered a lot, from those regulatory changes and ESG to data privacy, intellectual property, and how important culture and leadership are in due diligence. I think our listeners will find this really helpful as they navigate the M&A landscape in India.
I hope so. And as always, we encourage everyone listening to reach out with any questions or comments. We love hearing from our audience and learning from their experiences too.
That's a great point. We're all learning together in this, and sharing our knowledge is the best way to grow and adapt as the M&A landscape evolves.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this episode of Couple of Lawyers' Arguments and Thoughts.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of due diligence in India. Hope you found it informative and insightful.
Until next time, stay curious and keep those legal minds sharp.